What's up, everybody watching this later? Time for a live stream. That means I'm avoiding boring paperwork. So hit me with any questions. We'll see how many people come in or if you're stuck watching it later. Would be a boring few minutes at first. I suppose that'll determine whether I post it or not. Got a few. There's Sue's. First one in, first comment. So, I'm clearly avoiding paperwork, so. Zebra's made it. It's crazy how fast people can make it in here when I hit send. So it's clearly time to avoid paperwork. That is a skill, something I've had to learn over the last few months canning. That's new to me. Good evening, Hill. Are you using the giant pressure cooker? I think that's the method I most recently used. Impatiently waiting for that little rattler on the top to go. I think those are getting harder to find. They don't make those. I don't think they make those pressure cookers like that anymore. Shalom, Randy. That immediately tells me where you came from, so I'm avoiding paperwork, so I figured why not get some help in doing so. Hello, James. Get no exciting video, I'm just avoiding paperwork, so I figured I'd bring some friends in to help. If you didn't see earlier, I did ended up on a live stream of a gentleman that just goes by the Angry Viking, not therapist, Angry Viking, and he's I forget what he titles himself, but YouTube personality patriot that goes out and does some marches and some things during the current crisis and pandemics, and I ended up on his live stream for a while, talking about trauma and PTSD. I think the chat in general was about PTSD, so or his entire video was. So I don't know. We'll stick around for a few minutes and see if anybody has any questions or things they want to ask or find out about. And if not, then I guess it's a sign I should really do paperwork. There's 8 people around, so. Oh yeah, Erlinger just up the road. I am about 13-hour drive from there right now. As you can see, I'm hiding from civilization in my camper. I'm somewhere else doing some consulting work and some training, but yep, Erlinger's just up the road from me. EMT class, good. I was an EMT from 18 to about, I think I let it lapse about 23. I was working in law enforcement full time, and it just wasn't serving me. My plan was to kind of hang on to it and do it part time, but it says the stream quality has been automatically lowered. So if this looks like junk, let me know and we'll do something different. All this live stuff is new to me. Definitely following in the footsteps of some people that do it very well. So, hey, Mr. Cook. Speaking of somebody else just up the road. Although I'm nowhere near you now. And Mr. Comment first. I think you'd get enough of me. I am out in the middle of nowhere, so. California. Let's see, so I think I've ventured it far enough west. I'm in Central now, so 5:30-ish there for you guys. There we go. What qualifies something as PTSD rather than just a bad experience? Is there some kind of cutoff? So, yeah, great question. So, here is what PTSD, here's the 5 diagnostic criteria for PTSD. The first is witnessed a critical event or was made aware of a critical event that may have involved death or serious injury. Found out somebody else was involved in that. There's a couple different criteria that'll get you into that, what we call criteria A. So the event itself. So the other things that we look at is the rest of the criteria. So you have repeated dissociation. Flashbacks and nightmares are the lowest level of dissociation, all the way up to actually feeling like you're still there. So you have those reminders, not just that you drive by and can remember that it happened, but so, some pretty difficult reminders that you have strong attempts to avoid those reminders. It changes the cognition about yourself or the world, and it impacts the areas of your life. So, unfortunately, we could take those 5 criteria and probably diagnose millions of people with PTSD, because especially those that may have served in the military or public safety, grew up in a traumatic home life, fits those criteria really well, right? Something happened, we have reminders and reminders of flashbacks to all different extents. We have serious attempts to avoid those reminders. It's changed the cognition of ourselves and others, and it's changed the way, rather that it impacts other areas of our life. I got distracted, but impacts areas of our life. So there's the difference between an event and PTSD. Now that's the clinical words for it. Here's what I would offer to people is, how is that event, and whatever it was, this critical event, how is it affecting you today? If you just think about it and it feels like a terrible thing, then okay, we would argue with EMDR that's properly processed, and that of course you're still going to have memories about it. We're not looking for amnesia even when we do treatment for PTSD, but how does it negatively impact your life today? If it's an event that brings up bad memories, but you can do okay with it, we would argue that's probably well processed and is no longer PTSD, even if at one point it may have been. They've fallen under the diagnostic criteria. So if it is something that continues to bother you more than just thinking about the event and not liking to think about the event, it's actually impacting the way you live your life now, that's where we're going to get more into areas of like PTSD. Now, that's not to discount the bad things that happen. There are plenty of other disorders that it may qualify for, something like otherwise specified stress disorder, or unspecified stress disorder, or acute stress disorder if it's within the first 30 days. So there's lots of things that could qualify for. It doesn't necessarily have to be PTSD, and it doesn't have to be PTSD to get good treatment for it. To be perfectly honest, I've said to many of my clients in the office that wanted to know a diagnosis, I have to diagnose people only because insurance companies tell me that I have to. Otherwise, we can throw all those titles in the trash for all I care. Not to minimize something that somebody's going through, and not to minimize that sometimes knowing that a diagnosis might make people at least feel like they're normalized, or there's a group that they can work with that may understand them, but who cares? Let's just fix it. So there's kind of my my difference between a critical event and a PTSD critical event. So yeah, help. It is definitely the nicest thing. I travel a lot and do a lot of speaking, consulting engagements in different places for trauma, and because of that, I spend a lot of time in hotels, which I do not like. So if there's any chance that I can take my camper with me, like this one, I'm going to do it so I can hide. I like hiding from civilization. Camping people tend to be pretty cool people anyway. So traumatic brain injury survivors. So one of the interesting things about TBIs, and as you may have seen in your own husband, can change a lot of different things. It doesn't just change your physicality, right? Maybe it does cause you some problems. There's some deficits in that area, but it also changes the way that we perceive things. It changes the way that we may be hypervigilant or avoid things. Stress, irritability, changes a lot of different things. So early on, when I started doing EMDR therapy, I was concerned about those with TBI maybe not being able to do it, because we're kind of dealing with the whole left brain, right brain processing. So it turns out not only are they able to do it, but I get to see a lot of cool healing from those with TBI. Now, I don't want to mistake the actual physical problem of the TBI. Clearly, something that's not mental health therapy is going to fix. But the symptoms of the TBI is something that a lot of mental health practitioners can help with, especially through things like EMDR. So that is a lot on your plate, plus all the EMT stuff. So, oh, thanks, Lauren. I'm clear. I do these when I'm avoiding paperwork. Usually, I get bored after doing a couple notes and decide I think I'm going to go talk to somebody, because I'd rather talk to people than actually type up notes. So, here's another question from Zebra. Oh yeah, anger. I know anger all too well. So Zebra, here's the thing. We have dysfunctional emotions, right? And dysfunctional just meaning they're not functional, they're not helping us, right? So the big dysfunctional emotions are things like anxiety, depression, guilt, and anger. Anger really doesn't service a lot of purpose. Now, I'm not going to say that means nobody should ever be angry. There's definitely times in my life where maybe somebody's victimized somebody and I'm angry for them, right? but but it doesn't usually service a good purpose. It usually makes us make angry decisions, right? So anger is frustration turned all the way up. So the negative part about the post is that we can't do anything about those people, right? And that doesn't mean we're going to sit around and do nothing. That doesn't mean I want my clients or my patients to ever be victimized or ever just do nothing about a negative situation. But right now, I can't change them. It can't be done. So how my brain is perceiving the danger of all that is what escalates things like that from maybe from frustrated to angry, right? If my body is perceiving those as unrecoverable, dangerous things, that limbic system's firing off, right? The amygdala's firing off, the hippocampus is actually starting to shrink, and we get into that hypervigilant, easily irritated mode. Or think about it this way: that limbic system that I'm talking about is your fight or flight part of the brain. So if what they're doing tends to activate that fight or flight part of our brain, then of course we're going to be angry. Of course we're going to overreact. And again, overreact doesn't mean that we're dumb or stupid or can't handle it or we're weak. It just means we're overreacting. It's not to the essence of, hey, don't worry about what they're doing and just go on with your life. If that were easy, trust me, I'd write a book and we'd be rich. But it's not about just ignoring those things, but why are those things? It's getting in there and finding out why are those things going from frustrated to irritable? Why are those things getting to my limbic system, and why are those things making me act as if it were a life or death situation? There's our anger. There's our overreaction. It would take some specific searching, I think, but I think what you'll find as you watch these and some of the videos I do, or some of the people that may have been in my office, I like coping skills, but I don't think it's the answer to the problem. I don't think taking 5 deep breaths or telling you to count to 10 is how you fix the problem. Now, again, I'm not going to knock those skills, or not grounding when somebody's anxious or having a panic attack. Those things have been helpful, but I don't think it's the solution. So for me to say, here's what you should do every time you get angry about that, it's kind of hypocritical if I don't feel like coping mechanisms are the best way to do it, or coping skills. So we got to get in there and find out why is that making such a problem? Why is it making us so angry? And I'll finish with this. We know that today's dysfunctional emotions, which include anger, are created by previous life events, age 0 to 5 minutes ago. That's all previous life events that left us feeling helpless or hopeless or not good enough, or that we can't handle it. Well, if you look at it in that form, when the things are going on around us, and of course we're going to be frustrated about it, right? Again, I'm not telling people not to do anything, but you go from that frustration to anger because we're feeling helpless or hopeless or not good enough, or that we can't handle it. And who wouldn't feel overreactive when that happens? So I don't know your specific situation, and again, that might take some digging with some people to know exactly where. But if you'll think about the times in which this anger feels like before, you may have a pretty good starting place for a therapist. So Jay is the 11-year-old, gosh, you typed good for 11-year-old, 11-year combat veteran on here last time. The hypervigilance has been kicked into high gear with the tension and the fires. So one of the things that I'm so thankful that I get to see from afar, although I hate it for you all, is the things like the fires. I do live in an area that's prone to tornadoes sometimes, but it seems like those seem to be a lot more rare than those of you that are dealing with fires out in the West, or whether it be in another country. So, I always have home base to go to, and when that fire is making the possibility that you may not have home base to go to, I can absolutely see that a very high stressor. Now, keep in mind too that vigilance is important. You talked about hypervigilance, which is frustrating, but vigilance is important, right? I work with public safety and military most of the day. Vigilance, we want to remain. I'm still vigilant. I still know my surroundings. I still have security measures in place. So, vigilance about those things makes perfect sense. Who could go to sleep at night not thinking about it at all? But hypervigilance is kind of detrimental to our daily functioning, right? So just as I was saying to Zebra before, especially, I don't want to make it easy, but combat vet, you're thinking about it. I'm sure there's times in those 11 years where you did feel your life was in danger. Well, of course, these fires and the civil unrest make people feel nervous and like they're in danger. But if this is adding to the bucket that's already there, whether it be from combat or whether it be from early life, again, I never want to assume that somebody comes back from combat and has those difficulties, but the statistics are there, right? The obviousness of it can be there. It's a pretty good place to start. If the fires and the civil unrest are causing those feelings to pop up again, we're not going to make the fires any better. We got to make the feeling better. We got to make the dysfunctional part of that, the hypervigilance and the anxiety and the nervous part of it. We got to deal with that. The fires are the fires. They are bad. There's nothing going to make them good. The civil unrest is the civil unrest. Nothing's going to make it good. But again, if we're looking at events from age 0 to 5 minutes ago, and the feelings of helpless, hopeless, not good enough are getting popped up again, then there's a starting place for us. So doesn't it make perfect sense that fight or flight part of the brain that you've dealt with before is getting kicked back into high gear? Again, just to end with any tips to calm down? I mean, definitely, you can get into some things like grounding self. I actually had, I don't mind telling personal stories. I had a surgery not too long ago, or a medical procedure, and I had to be knocked out by some pretty hard drugs. I'm not a little guy, so it took a little extra to put me down. So when I came out of it, I was kind of in bad shape, and I specifically remember grounding myself, and I'll tell you about that. But grounding myself and being able to calm down, and I look back now, and I'm not an anxious person. I'm a pretty type A person that feels like I can deal with any situation that I'm confronted with. But coming out of this ketamine, being knocked out was a terrible feeling. And I remember touching things, the sheets, the bed rails, the mask on my face, the IV that was in my arm. I remember identifying these things and saying these things out loud. I'm in the hospital. This is the IV. I'm in the hospital. This is the arm rest. And again, that sounds very simple, and it sounds like that would be from going on to somebody who's particularly nervous. But I'm not really nervous. I just hit go live on a multi-million person platform, right? And granted, I'll probably have 8 or 10 in here at a time, but I'm not a very nervous person. So being able to ground myself and identify where I'm at, what that does is it takes that fight or flight part out of the situation, right? Why the hypervigilance? Why those reactions? Because our brain thinks we're in danger. So we've got to remind it, I'm not in danger. We're not going to try and convince it that this is good, what's going on, but wow, what if I could convince it that I wasn't in danger anymore? Hopefully some of that's helpful. So, Randy, PTSD, it sucks. I mean, there's no way around it. There's definitely healing from it. I get to see a lot of cool things on the couch in my office on a daily basis, and I myself have benefited in reducing PTSD symptoms through things like EMDR. That's why I'm such a hardcore believer in it. I used it and was treated by it before I knew anything much about it. So, I never want to be one of those doctors that says, here, go do this and you'll be fine. I want people to know that I've done my research to include, having EMDR used on me, which was life-changing at the time. So it does get old. It doesn't mean that symptoms don't go up and down sometimes. However, I have a statement that your trauma does not define you. So the trauma happened, the PTSD happened, but that's not necessarily you. And yeah, it takes some work. If somebody come in and the office and they were depressed and they got over it in 10 minutes of talk, gosh, I'd be rich. I'd write a book and I'd have a much bigger camper. I'd be rich. So it does get old, but it doesn't define you, and it's not necessarily you. It's a reaction to the things around you. So it is a bittersweet battle. Feels good to get some help and relief sometimes. Where I find most of my the sweet part of it is kind of looking back and seeing how I would have handled situations previously that I'm not handling that way now. That gives me a lot of internal comfort. So, hey Clackley, good to see you. Yeah, Mrs. Hill, that's tough. When it goes on for a long time, we even have a different name for it, dysthymia or persistent depressive disorder. If it goes on for too long, it's treated generally the same. Sometimes with dysthymia, we have people seek out medication because if it's long term like that, it could be a biological issue as well. One of the problems with the brain is it may not be using serotonin or have the serotonin, or the reuptake for their serotonin may be what we kind of in hyperdrive, so you don't have enough to use. So, if it goes on for too long, I'm not a medical doctor, so I can't give medical advice when it comes to medications, but I can tell you what I see in my office every day. And when it's persistent, I always recommend people talk to their primary physician or to a psychiatrist. Continue treatment, though, because that's the real fix, in my opinion. Meds have their places, but they're not a fix-all by any means. But, when it's persistent like that, check both of those avenues out if you haven't already. Sometimes we biologically have a problem with serotonin, so it's worth checking out. Coal miner's daughter. I know where that name comes from. Another bear transplant. Awesome, JW. Yeah, check it out. I mean, there's really specific ones. The ones we were always taught is like find 5 things to identify, and I'm sure I'll screw this up, but 5 things to identify, and 4 things you can touch, and 3 things you can smell, and so on and so forth. But the idea is it's all about getting that limbic system to understand that you're not in fight or flight right now. Getting that, that doesn't mean that fires and things are going to be good. It doesn't mean we don't need to remain vigilant. I'm not somebody that lives in a lot of code white, and being combat vet, I'm sure you know what that means, or condition white. I don't spend a lot of time there even now. I stay a little higher than that, but in the level of awareness. But gosh, if we're in red all the time, it's exhausting. Hey, good to see you, Lynn. Yeah, you bet, Zebra. That's my whole mission in life is to get this information out. I always tell people just because it says doctor doesn't mean I'm smarter than you. It just means I have more school loans. So I want you to have some of the information while I pay these back. Mr. Muscle Stash, Jared Sloan. Or should we say Mr. VIP, if he's not retired. Always sharing it, man. Glad you've made it on. So I don't know how long we'll go for. Again, just like last time, I think I just, threw the live on there and saw what happened. So I'm clearly avoiding doing any paperwork. So it is Saturday. I probably shouldn't be doing paperwork, but such is the life of a business owner. Is Mr. Muscle Stash? Is that official name now? Can we see Mr. Muscle Stash anywhere? But yeah. Okay, so Mr. VIP's retired. Okay. I did go see your old friends over in where they at now. They're in Paris now, I think. So I went and saw them for one show not too long ago. So we'll keep this up for a little bit and see if anybody else comes in or has any questions. But it's a Saturday night. I think hanging out with me, watching me do paperwork is probably not the most fun use of your time. But as I tell people, I'm kind of old and boring now, so no bars for me. Retired for show. I know, I'm a little sad about that. Oh, okay. So make sure to check out Mr. Muscle Stash on Instagram. Good buddy of mine, just up the road. Workout and wrestling aficionado, even if he's humble about it. You make me feel lazy. That's what you really do. And the what is the new is that, do you have a House of Pain? What is the new tent system that you got that you're destroying your friends in? I'll have to watch for that name. I remember you renaming it. I do watch. Yeah, that's a good question. So what are the techniques you'd would help for someone in a state of hypervigilance? So again, think of it in what we're trying to stop. That hypervigilance is not necessary. Vigilance is important. Hypervigilance is detrimental. So, think of what we're trying to stop. We're trying to get the limbic system, or the smoke alarm part of the brain, to calm down, because for some reason it thinks there's fire, right? It sees smoke, it's going off, it assumes that there's fire. Think about the way a smoke alarm works. Its job is to scream at you when it sees fire. That's it. It doesn't know to do anything else. It also does not judge what the smoke is coming from. It does not know if the couch is on fire or if you burn dinner. It just sees smoke and it tells you about it. So think of it in the terms of getting that smoke alarm to shut up. There might still be smoke in the room from burning dinner, right? You're opening the windows and the doors, and you make fun of each other and go out to eat. But you got to get that limbic system calmed down. What happens is that that amygdala starts to go crazy, and the hippocampus starts to shrink, and your prefrontal cortex starts to shrink, and that's your thinking brain. So you can't think your way out of it. You're going to have to tell that limbic system that you're okay, and that you're in a place that you're okay. Now, even if you're at home or at a bus stop or in your car, whatever it is, it may not be your safe spot where you're the most comfortable, but think about getting that limbic system to calm down. So again, I'm a big fan of grounding techniques. I don't think it's a fix, but I definitely think it will help some people when in that hypervigilant state. Don't try to convince yourself that you're 100% safe. Come back from trauma or combat or military service or public safety service. I'm not going to convince you that you're 100% safe. This world's too crazy, nor would I try to convince you of that. What we have to convince you of is that the limbic system isn't needed right now, and it's okay to calm down, that you're not in a state of emergency. You just might be in a state of nervousness. So I'm a big fan of grounding techniques. Again, find 5 things in the room that you can identify. That's what was really helpful with me with that medical procedure story. I grabbed the rails, and I felt the rails of the bed, and I felt the sheets, and I knew the nurse was standing right next to me. I identified her. Even if I couldn't get the words out yet, I was still kind of loopy. I identified her, and I'll tell you, I'm not somebody that gets very anxious and has to use a lot of those techniques, but that one definitely saved me that day. Looking back on it, I would have been an absolute anxious mess. No telling how I would have come out of that bed waking up if I didn't have some kind of way to ground that. Oh, no, Miss Hill, everybody's doing a great job. It's my fault. I procrastinate so well when it comes to paperwork. I get everything else done, but paperwork. So, well, thanks, Garen. I appreciate that. The Hurt Yurt. Perfect. I knew it was something that... I knew you had something for it. Not the House of Pain. The Hurt Yurt. Man, I remember the days of you literally living at the gym. And I think I was doing... I had a post. I made a post about it years and years ago to find it. I think I was out doing deadlifts, and I made a complaint about people not putting their equipment away or something. And I didn't post it till I left. And I had forgotten that you stayed there all the time. So you had messaged later like, I'm like 10 feet away. You could have come and gotten, a spotter or some help. It's funny the things you remember. Geez, 28 minutes. I'm so good at wasting time. I hope the people that are waiting on my paperwork in business aren't watching this. As you can see, I'm hiding from civilization in my camper, which I thought would be perfect quiet time to get stuff done, and it turns out I just wanted to talk to you guys instead. So maybe I won't let this one go for an hour. It took, people got notified about it, and then I think it took seemed like 3 hours for it to render in high definition, so people kept emailing me asking where it was. So, you bet, Lynn, absolutely. Oh yeah, the good old days. I mean, really, who has an apartment in a gym? That was so handy. Yes, I almost tried to pronounce your name, but I'm not going to. uh, so, yeah. So asked about physical symptoms. So yeah, so those are somatic symptoms, and I'll tell you ones that I see a lot in my office. Yeah, some of these you're talking about muscle twitches, body aches, psychosomatic pain. They absolutely can. And two things come to mind. One is a lot of people will come for help. Will come to my office, especially dealing with stress or trauma, and they'll have gastro disease or they'll have high blood pressure. They'll have irritable bowel syndrome. They'll be diagnosed with acid reflux. And let me give the caveat first: if a medical doctor has diagnosed you with that and they're treating you for that, please stay on those treatments. Please continue to follow up. It may definitely be a physical thing. However, I do see time after time after time when people are no longer dealing with traumatic reminders, when people are no longer dealing with that high level of traumatic stress, suddenly they don't have irritable bowel disease anymore, and suddenly they don't have GERD. Now, again, I'm not a medical doctor. My PhD is in counseling, so I'm not going to ever speak against a medical doctor's ruling. That's their area, and I hope they would do the same for mine. But not knowing enough about things like irritable bowel syndrome and GERD, are they lifelong problems, but the symptoms can be reduced to a point where it's no longer effective, or was that not the problem in the first place? That I don't know, and you'd have to talk to your physician about. But I cannot describe to you how many people come in and they have stress-related symptoms like GERD or irritable bowel syndrome, and 3 weeks later they don't have it anymore. And gosh, not only do they get the mental health relief from that, from whatever they were dealing with, but now they get mental health relief from having to run to the bathroom, and they get to eat pizza again, or they can go back to foods that they ate when they were in the military and it not cause them problems. So there's absolutely physical problems that cause those things. But I'll tell you, time and time and again, I see people, at least with reduced symptoms or no symptoms after getting rid of the stress. The other thing that I think about, and I was just listening to a podcast about it on the way here, or a book on tape. Yeah, like we have tapes. An audio book on the way here from Francine Shapiro, who created EMDR therapy, which is what I use. And they did a lot of studies and have come out a lot of information about phantom pain. Somebody that might lose their leg in an accident or a trauma or in this public safety or the military. Part of the problem is the brain thinks that the leg's still there and it's still in pain. So now, if you have a physical condition that's causing pain, like maybe maybe they had to cut you above the knee and your ACL is too tight, or there's a nerve problem. We're not saying it's a cure-all, not by any means. I don't want anybody to get the impression by that. But I have absolutely seen phantom limb pain go away in my office after EMDR, and it's just because the brain's holding on to that injury. It's not holding on to pain. It's not holding on to the thing that's actually there. So again, I don't want to overspeak that. It's not a cure-all, and there are plenty of physical things that can cause that pain, but I've watched it in my office be cured and reduce symptoms. So how can I not believe it? How can I not believe it that it helps with some somatic pains? And you wrote about things like the muscle twitches. That's got stress written all over it, right? Dehydration and stress. Gosh, what a combination for muscle twitches. So let me get caught up here. Great question. Great choice, Lynn. I'm assuming that I got on here instead of paperwork. Let's see if I can cover the brand of this so I don't advertise for them. Oh, well, I'll gladly advertise for Relentless Defender, but not the drink itself. So Miss Hill used to set a timer, give yourself certain amounts to do before taking a break. Gosh, I even try to will myself sometimes, like, if I could just work for a solid hour, then I can stop and do something else. And nope, I set up my camera instead. So the very special Mr. Muscle Stash from the Hurt Yurt suffers from situational depression, finding the strength to, strength is right, and pretty much the system you just spoke about. Yeah, so and so depression the easy way to say it is it's sad turned all the way up, right? Because sad we can deal with. We all have situations that are sad. We can deal with sad. And that's not to minimize anybody's sad or depression, but sad, I can deal with that, right? Nervous, frustrated, remorse, I can deal with those things. It's when they turn to the bigger symptoms, the dysfunctional symptoms, right? Sad turns to depressed, nervous turns to anxious, frustrated to anger, remorse into guilt. That's when we start having dysfunctional problems. So, especially when I hear the word situational, the first thing I want to look at is, how did this pattern start, right? How did this pattern start of from day 0 to yesterday that started this reaction, that started the depression, that started the I can't handle it or deal with it. Again, like I said in the beginning of this, we know that today's dysfunctional emotions, and depression's one of them, come from earlier life events, age 0 to yesterday. It doesn't have to be childhood like a lot of people think, but 0 to yesterday that left us feeling helpless, hopeless, not good enough, or that we can't handle it. And that those thoughts are being re-triggered today, not necessarily the event, right? It's not always worth chasing the event at first. If you came into my office and you were afraid to get into a car and we found out that 2 years ago you had a car wreck, that one's pretty easy. That's an event being re-triggered. But you'd be amazed how many times that we use certain techniques with EMDR and people don't necessarily remember things they've forgotten about trauma, but maybe realize, oh, this situational depression is exactly like this when I was 8 or 12 or 15 or 20 or 30. And that's being re-triggered. So again, we immediately feel helpless and hopeless and not good enough. And wow, doesn't have that depression written all over it. I know a guy, for you specifically, just saying. So Seuss talks about long-term minor stress, like jobs and bills, phew, I don't know if that's minor, how they impact differently in very suddenly high, stressful, but short time frame. So great question. So we have 2 types of trauma that we talk about with EMDR. And the first is big T trauma. That's the one everybody thinks about, right? Plane crashes, 9/11, car wrecks, the things that happen. Little T trauma, and it's not little t because it's not as severe, it's just more chronic and acute. So divorces, bills, high stress jobs, parents' divorces, dad leaving when you're young, losing a family member and it affecting us for a long period of time. Those are adverse life events. Little T trauma is adverse life events, and they're still adverse. They're just not as acute and quick as some of those big T traumas. Absolutely, they can affect us. And, the question about why does it affect us eventually? Well, maybe in the beginning we weren't to that helpless, hopeless, not good enough point. But at some point we did. And whether that's now or whether it's just being re-triggered now, that helpless, hopeless, not good enough, that might as well be traumatized all over again. Terrible trouble with wrists. That's pretty interesting. It'd be kind of as the researcher part of me, it'd be kind of interesting to know what was causing that. So it can be something tied to physical trauma. It could be a nervous tick that you have has worn them out. Mr. Mustache there is, or Muscle Stash, as you can tell by his name, is quite the power lifter. So he knows all too well about wrist pain. It's a coal miner's daughter, Shalom. It's anxiety and panic attacks due to daily dizziness and vertigo. Gosh, that would make me have panic and anxiety. Up into your life at 33. Why do doctors not refer more often? Touchy subject on that one. So first I'll say about the panic attacks and anxiety due to the daily dizziness and vertigo. Vertigo is something my father deals with after a bad car wreck when he was younger. And he can literally just be walking down the sidewalk and turn his head a certain way and get vertigo. He had to give up his pilot's license for it. It's kind of a disappointing thing that he had to go through. But if I'm having daily events like that, how can I not be stressed? How can I not be leaning towards some kind of anxiety or panic disorder? Now, when it comes to anxiety, keep in mind that's nervous turned up all the way, right? I would imagine, I'm not going to pretend to know all about you, but I'm going to imagine that if I had vertigo and dizziness all day and never really knew when it was going to hit, I'd be nervous too, right? There's certain things you can't put yourself into the position of, worried about that nervous. So So the big thing is, when does it become anxiety and panic attacks? Well, think about panic attacks. First, think about the limbic system. Well, I talk about that fight or flight all the time. Well, what's the limbic system's job to do when we're in a real life or death emergency? It speeds up our heart so we get more blood. We breathe faster to get more oxygen. It heats up our body so our tendons and ligaments won't tear. It turns off our digestive system because it turns out in the middle of a fight it's not so handy to have to use the bathroom, so it just shuts it off. That's why you get dry mouth when you're nervous. You get an adrenaline dump, so you're stronger. You've heard stories of people lifting cars off of people when they get that adrenaline dump, and it hones your senses or causes you tunnel vision or dizziness. So that's what it's supposed to do in a real emergency. Well, what does a panic attack look like? Heart beating fast, breathing fast, sweating for no reason, digestive system's all messed up, you're shaking from adrenaline, and your senses are messed up. So your brain is doing exactly what it's supposed to do, just doing it at the wrong time. So that's why we go into panic. I would imagine if I was trying to drive down the road or step down from a high place, come down some stairs, and I got dizzy, I think I'd panic too. At least to the extent of nervousness. Now, hopefully, with skills and training and life experiences, it won't turn to attack, but that's not necessarily under our control all the time either, is it? So why don't doctors refer out more? Well, probably the same accidental bias that we have. I don't think that medication is a cure-all. I think medication has a great place in treatment, but I don't think it's a cure-all. But think about the systemic and scientific way that a lot of medical doctors talk. And this isn't a knock to them in any way. At one point, I was really interested in going back and getting a psychiatry MD after I started this. Funny side note, my wife said that she loves me and that I'm absolutely intelligent enough to do that, but that I'll be single because 10 years of college is already enough. So poor thing had to deal with me through that. So I am interested in it, but think about the scientific way in which they look at things. A lot of them are taught and look at kind of a chart. This is the problem and this is the cure. If this doesn't work, then we'll do this. If this doesn't work, we'll do this. And they're not doing it arbitrarily. They know that they're going to start with the less invasive maneuver or the less invasive way to treat things and move up. And all these steps have been proven to work, just in varying degrees and in varying severity for things. Well, ours does not necessarily, on the counseling side, that's not exactly how we think. I don't have a one-size-fits-all mentality, and I'm not saying that theirs necessarily is, but if you go in with certain symptoms, they're looking a certain direction. Well, I'll just tell you, the symptoms look a lot the same when people come to my office dealing with trauma or stress. And while it's not a one-size-fits-all, we're going to have to tailor that program into each individual person. But we think in a more less systematic kind of way, on average. I'm not going to again say that about all therapists or about all medical doctors, but so they feel like their way is best. We feel like our way is best. So we probably accidentally have some bias in there. Now, personally, I've seen medication work really well for people, so I do recommend it for people as long as they don't make it their only option. So I don't know why they don't more, or perhaps they are not comfortable with understanding mental health. A specialist can be a generalist, but not the other way around. So if you're going to a cardiologist, and they may be the best cardiologist in the entire world, but they just don't think mental health. They also don't think pancreas. So it's probably the same for both of us. We kind of get stuck in our way of things that we know work in our own specialties. I'm an Emdr specialist that we've talked about before, where a lot of this stuff comes from. But if you came and asked me about something like emotionally focused therapy, I'd have to send you to somebody else because I don't know. Shalom Badwabbit. I saw that, Garen. It distracted me there for a second when it popped up. I think it was actually earlier today that it did it. You're going to see some bear/AVT content here coming up pretty quick, and I was hoping that's when it would cross 100,000, but is what it is. I'm excited for him. Yeah, I'm excited. Awesome for Bear too. So Randy's got some stuff here. Yeah, you're exactly right. That rebuilding stronger and better. I don't say that a lot to people just because I don't want to anyone to ever take wrong that we're minimizing their suffering. But it is true. When you come out of things like PTSD and trauma and stress, you come out far more resilient. I do believe that PTSD is a rough way to do it, but it's a heck of a way to build resilience. You know where to find them. Muscle stash. Yeah, so good question, Chapel. How can we use forgiveness to help get past the childhood trauma? And yes, of course, I recognize your name. So, how do we get past childhood trauma? Well, the thing about forgiveness, is as we know, it's for us and not them, right? So, the true forgiveness is not changing the thing. It's not changing the bad thing that happened. It's not changing the trauma. It's not changing what they've done or how they think. Because quite frankly, I can't change that and I can't change them. Hopefully, if they've been involved in some kind of childhood trauma themselves, or if they're perpetuating trauma amongst other people, I hope they change that. But I have no dog in that fight. I'm here for the individual's mental health that's talking to me. So the thing about forgiveness, I don't think that blind forgiveness just fixes the problem, not in any way. But what if forgiveness was used in some kind of what we call a cognitive interweave when we're doing reprocessing therapy? So I've talked a couple of times, for those that may have been here a little bit earlier, about we know that today's dysfunctional emotions are caused by earlier events that left us feeling helpless, hopeless, and not good enough. Well, those are the things we have to get rid of. Now, we can't get rid of them by me just telling you you're good enough and you're not helpless and you're not hopeless, right? There's good people in the world. Just go wait and see. That's really positive psychology, right? The way I describe positive psychology is we can probably come up with a couple of things that you do well and write them on Post-it notes and put them around your mirror when you're getting dressed every day. And you read them and you feel pretty good and you're going to kick the day's ass, and you get in your car and your car won't start and you're pissed off all over again. Everything that we just wrote on that note goes out the window. So true positive psychology is a little more in depth than that. But that's how my brain conceptualizes it. So, back to the forgiveness thing. Where I would use forgiveness is not to just convince my client that they just have to go forgive somebody. I think that's great if you can. But I'm not that type of person very well, so I can't really ask it of anybody else. I also don't think just forgiving somebody takes away the trauma side of it. Maybe it takes away some of the anger. Maybe it takes away some of the constant frustration or the constant thinking about it. Maybe. But where I would rather use forgiveness is within EMDR itself. So that EMDR that I've been talking about, which is the treatment for things like PTSD, trauma, and a lot of other things, but those are the main headlines that it's known for. We got to reprocess that memory. If that memory's still stuck on the right side of the brain and reactivating that limbic system, that fight or flight part of the brain every time, we've got to deal with that first. And maybe forgiveness is one of the ways that we integrate into EMDR in order to do that. Now, I know that doesn't exactly explain how it works or necessarily what we would do. That's something that needs to be led by a good EMDR knowledgeable and trained and experienced therapist. But that's where I'm going to use forgiveness, is to let you come to your own conclusion about it while we're reprocessing a difficult memory, and let you decide if forgiveness is correct or not. I don't have a dog in that fight. I think it would be good because the things it would do for you, but I don't necessarily know that it fixes all the problems. So, great question though. Hey, Badaway, thank you for reminding people to hit the thumbs up. It's definitely that's definitely a bear person. All too well, he says. Oh, strong man, coming to my world, are you? Man, I tell you what, one of these days you'll have to come over, Jared, and run the gauntlet on the back acre with me. I have the most interestingly put together strongman gym. If you replace all your tires and wheels on your truck, you keep the tires and wheels and do strongman stuff with them. And if you have a riding mower that doesn't work very well, you tie a rope to it and you drag it up the hill. So it's my own little sled with wheels. So come on over to Strongman. A lot of people would never know it, but as you know, as anybody in this group, that I've ventured into your world of bodybuilding for a little while, man. But you blew me away always. So I still have the memory of making it to the show in I'll just say on Paris Pike, but making it to the show and I was late. You were just finishing up, so because it made me stay in the lobby forever to buy a ticket. So, all right, let me cover my branding here. It's just water, Mom. I promise. So bad wabbit, somebody that does well during the day, then wake up in the middle of the night, panic attack, not being able to breathe. So, a couple interesting things about that. Not as interesting that you have them. Sorry about that. But that is treatable. But a couple things come up. One, I always say that not being able to go to sleep is anxiety. Waking up in the night is depression or trauma. Why? Because we've all laid in bed staring at the ceiling before worried about tomorrow. Hopefully that's not an everyday thing for some people, but it does happen, and that's a really good explanation of anxiety for me. Worry, worry, worry about nothing I can do anything about right now. So, waking up in the middle of the night, think of it in the way that we talked about earlier. I know you logged in. You were one of the first ones to log in. So you heard me talk about the physical responses of the limbic system, right? The physical responses when it thinks that we're in danger. When that smoke alarm goes off, it doesn't know any better. It perceives danger. It just automatically activates. Our heart starts racing. We start breathing fast. We get an adrenaline dump. You can't sleep through that, right? You can't sleep through getting a rush of adrenaline and your digestive system continuing to shut off while you sleep, and your heart racing and breathing fast, and you pop up, and now your senses are all messed up because they've tried to go into honing in mode, and you can't figure out where you are, but they were honed in on whatever dream or flashback you just had, not in the room that you're sitting in. So doesn't it make a lot of sense? It doesn't just, we can't decide just to stop doing it, but doesn't it make a lot of sense that that's what wakes us up, is some kind of traumatic memory or some kind of traumatic feeling or some kind of danger feeling that yanked us out of bed? So, you said all the symptoms, not being able to breathe. So, helpless anger and guilt is how I feel about a heroin addiction. Whew. Wilkerson, that's a tough one. I'm not somebody that regularly treats substance abuse of that level. Not that I wouldn't or couldn't, but, I deal with a lot of substance abuse. But here's my belief on substance abuse. Now, I know there can be absolute physical addictions, especially for things like opiates that she's going through. But outside of the physical addiction, the need for substances is a symptom, not a disorder. So it's, what are we covering? What void are we trying to fill? What thing are we trying to forget about? What demon are we trying to not deal with, right? What void are we filling? So although there can definitely be physical addiction along the way, most people that come into my office for trauma are dealing with some kind of symptom like that. Maybe not quite to the opiate level, because that is a much more strenuous early type of therapy that I would not consider myself an expert at. But if we don't take care of the problem, we'll never take care of the symptoms. So, a lot of people can white knuckle their way through behavioral treatments. And there's a lot of good ones out there that just teach you not to drink anymore and teach you not to use anymore. And they're great. They work great for millions of people. The thing people need to watch out for, though, is relapse comes when the problem wasn't taken care of, right? It's a symptom. What's it a symptom of? So helpless anger and guilt, I can absolutely imagine what that feels like. And I always tell people in my office, I can't sympathize. I never know exactly what you're going through, but I can empathize. And the way I describe that is, I know what it's like to feel like you're drowning and you got one little nostril above the water, and you're kind of worried about that little guy, right? I think anybody can kind of get the visual for that. And so I can only imagine that's how it feels. I hope she gets some help. I hope you get some help as well, because that's a very difficult thing to deal with. Helpless is a terrible way to feel. So Miss Hill has adverse reactions to adrenaline rushes. Stay calm and good message. That's pretty interesting. So what it makes me think of is I'm a big fan of the Hulk. He's my favorite hero / villain. I guess depends on what day it is. And on the movies, somebody gave him a heart monitor watch. So even when he's about to be intimate with somebody or getting angry with somebody, he has to keep that heart rate down. So yeah, prayers for you dealing with that. That's tough. Well, Lauren Morrison, who has said that she'd love to see Bear and I work together on some videos, stay tuned very shortly. So everybody is dealing with the higher level of anxiety. And I completely agree that prepping the brain is part of prepping. So stand by very shortly is all I will say. Car won't start. See, that's why I use that analogy, Susan, because everybody gets that one. That you turn the key and the thing doesn't start. Oh, man, just instant frustration. People don't choose evil for evil. They choose evil for convenience. Whew, man, if that doesn't hit the nail on the head a lot of time. There are definitely some evil people out there, but I agree with you. Somebody that spent 15 years in public safety, They're looking for the convenient victim. I can't tell you how many times I've watched on video car burglars, or larceny from auto is what we called it in my state, but walk along and just check door handles on cars. And they weren't breaking into cars, or they were breaking in technically to cars, but they weren't throwing things through the window. They were just finding the ones that were empty and getting the stuff, or unlocked, and getting the stuff out of it. So yeah, convenience. Of course, JR, good to see you. Oh, I didn't know that about Yankee. I remember him saying something about that, Randy, but one of the last lives, but I didn't really catch all the land stuff. I kind of wondered where he'd been lately. So, what was the dry run? Just trying some distance, I guess. Yeah, you bet, coal miner's daughter. You're more than welcome. Be interesting to see what the not a candidate for anxiety meds was. One of the things that they're doing a lot now is DNA tests, and they can tell you what medications your body does not do well with and will do better with. I don't know a whole lot about it. I know it's not always covered by insurance, so that's one thing. But yeah, whew. Come on over, Jared. I'm telling you can join me in pulling the lawnmower up the hill with all my neighbors looking out the window like, that dude's lost his mind. So, yeah, Eric, absolutely. So EMDR, and the reason we use the acronym is most people, that's what they've heard it referred to as. They didn't even know what it stood for, but it's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Now, it's a mouthful. It's a lot to explain, but I was just reading a text from the creator the other day that 30 years ago when it was created, she really wishes she just would have called it reprocessing therapy, but now the branding's kind of out there. So eye movement desensitization, reprocessing. The way to think about it is it deals a lot with the left brain and right brain mechanics. The way I like to describe the brain part is the left side is the logic side. And the way I describe logic is 2 + 2 is 4, whether you like it or not. Doesn't matter if you love math, hate math, despise math, like me. Failed out of college because of math, like me. There's no emotion to it. It's just a thing. It's just over there on a shelf. 2 + 2 is 4. The chaos side, the right side, is not necessarily tornadoes and hurricanes kind of chaos, but all incoming information that needs to be processed when you're in REM sleep, third stage of sleep. So what EMDR does is takes those things that are stuck over there and try to get them over that logic side. It's not hypnotism. It's not electroshock therapy. It's nothing physical like that. There's some guided imagery and some bilateral stimulation that goes on, and it's really just helping your brain do what it's supposed to do in the third stage of sleep. So through the discovery of science and medicine and all that, we've figured this out along the way, and a very rapid intervention for trauma and stress, depression, anxiety. It originally billed for things like PTSD for trauma, but what it really treats is maladaptively processed memories. So yeah, I do tend to just stick with the EMDR acronym, and you can see why. It's a heartful. So. Is it odd to love the level of chaos and stress? Will create chaos if you don't have it. I'm most uncomfortable in the calm. Well, that's why I'm here tonight, because I don't like calm paperwork. So, yes, I say that jokingly, but think about this. If there were people if there weren't people that were okay with chaos, if there weren't people that weren't okay with stress, we wouldn't have military or public safety members, plain and simply. You'll do that job for 3 days and decide, forget this, I'm out. And I don't think every day is the worst stress. I don't think every day is chaos. I've done that job myself for 15 years. But if we didn't have people that thrived on those things, not necessarily create it in the public, but didn't thrive on being able to deal with that, we wouldn't have anybody to respond to those calls. Because after a couple of them, you're pretty sick of it, right? After a couple of them to the same house over and over again, you're pretty sick of dealing with their chaos. So, one of the greatest things about that public safety job was once roll call was over, I was on my own to do whatever the heck I wanted within reason, right? And every day after roll call was something new. Whether it was 5 calls pending, or whether it was 3 exciting calls through the day, or whether we sat on a snow day behind a building and tried to not run into things. So I don't know, I don't know what odd is, because if that's odd, then I'm odd too. So think about it too, that craving for adrenaline and chaos. How many times have you heard stories of coming back from combat and they immediately buy like a Hayabusa motorcycle and go 200 miles an hour down the road? Some people just really like adrenaline. Some people really like chaos. Some people crave it. And if we didn't have that, we'd probably be SOL on protection. Lauren, I'm assuming the super chat, although I appreciate it, I'm assuming it's because I don't have monetization. I have more than enough subscribers for that, but you have to have something crazy like 4,000 hours of viewing time before you can do that. I'm not really sure how it works. I'm assuming you have to be monetized before you can do that stuff. So that I don't know. I'm using a program that's not YouTube to transmit everything, because otherwise the chat goes by so fast I can't see it, as you've heard Bear talk about. So I'm assuming that's why. I don't know. I'll have to look into that. But I do appreciate you thinking about it. So Lynn says that's where the anger and guilt are. Yeah. So here's the problem. I know you're kind of racking your brain to think back when she was younger, but here's the thing. Neither one of us know what life event or events left her feeling helpless and hopeless and not good enough, or have a void, right? Just not too long ago, I'm still very fortunate. I still have my parents around, and one of them mentioned like, "Oh, I remember this really bad thing that happened when you were younger." I'd completely forgotten about it, to be honest, and my parents have been holding that they had been worried about it all this time, that it negatively affected me, and I hadn't thought of it in 30 plus years or 30 years or so. So we never know. They're also not with us 24/7 after a certain amount, so we're not saying that they might have had some horrible big T trauma, right? Like 9/11 or sexual assault or a car wreck. We don't know. But even if they did, would they tell us anyway half the time, right? I deal with that a lot. Sometimes when parents are told about things, we shame the people for it because we're messed up humans as well. I appreciate the attempt, and it makes sense why, but don't rack your brain too much, because we never know what makes people feel helpless or hopeless and not good enough. Two public safety members can go to the exact same scene. One of them leaves and doesn't have any problem with it, and the other one, it ruins their career. So it's one of the reasons that we don't really chase a lot of what the trauma reminder is. We can actually do EMDR with people about events over a lifetime, or periods of events like bullying. Say you were bullied all through high school. We don't have to go in there and reprocess every single time you were bullied. We're just dealing with those feelings that come up because of the bullying. So on that note, I've spent an awful lot of time trying to help clients figure out what the trauma was, and as an early therapist, I felt like I was banging my head into the wall until I figured out over time that we don't necessarily have to have an event. Sometimes a dysfunctional memory or maladaptively processed emotion will work too. So, yeah. Fluffy, what a cool name, Fluffy Panda. New to anxiety medications. If you haven't had any change, give it 4 to 6 weeks. I always tell people. And here's what I tell people about what to know, because it doesn't make things better, right? It doesn't make bad things good or good things bad, or life just floating around. It's not an opiate. What it does is help us not to go from 0 to 10 so fast of anxiety or anger or depression or trauma or whatever we're dealing with. And if you're not going from 0 to 10 so fast, you can get in there and find out what's causing the anxiety. Not to mention that going to 0 to 10 all day long is freaking exhausting. So. Oh yeah, see, Lauren, you said it exactly. Medic in the Army. I mean, people like us tend to like adrenaline. We don't like norm. Sir, you bet, Eric. Tried 2 different ones. Fluffy said both cause problems. Yeah, so that's not uncommon. Keep in mind that it's not, depending on what it is. So if it's SSRI or SNRI, it's not necessarily affecting the nerves usually, or changing the self. Has to do with a lot of the level of serotonin and the reuptake, which I kind of call like the pool pump, which deals with that. And if you learn and break down all the letters of SSRI and SNRI, it really explains it really well. Now, there are definitely some out there that I don't have a whole lot of knowledge about that can be nerve affecting like that, but I do know of many instances where somebody would be put on an SSRI, either have that kind of issue or have restless leg or can't sleep, and they go and get a different one, which affects them a different way, and they all work a little bit differently, and they were good to go after that. So earlier I said that I know that one of the new things is kind of get a DNA swab or a blood test, and they can take it to a lab and figure out what chemicals work better for you. If it's something you can afford, then maybe that's worth it. Or maybe the doctor's starting to figure out what works for you. No problem on the hitting enter. I've done it many a time. I tend to ramble here anyway. That's kind of like hitting enter and backspace too much. So, Shalom Hunter, good to see you. Did you see our man passed 100,000 subs sometime today, I think? So Maxine talked about being numb with breakthrough bouts of anxiety. So we've talked about anxiety a little bit already, just being that nervous turned up to 10 and that limbic system going crazy. Let me tell you about numb just a little bit though. So I'm a visual person, so I'll use my hands on this one. If neutral or numb is right in the middle, right here, and you look at both sides of numb or neutral, well, one side is negative, right? And it's from neutral, it's, the bad things that happen. Got a flat tire, late to work, spilled my coffee, and it gets worse and worse and worse, all the way down to the far point where it's stuff we really don't want to remember because it's so negative. We don't want to deal with it. Well, on the opposite side, so here's neutral again, on the opposite side going up is the positive stuff, right? The stuff that feels good. Relationships and winning things and working hard, and all the way to the top of the things that we really, really love and made a big difference in our life. Well, we want to keep all that, get rid of all the negative stuff. Unfortunately, our brain doesn't work that way. It doesn't know positive and negative. If you think about, and I'm sure if there's a psychologist or neurologist on here, they just lost their mind when I said that it doesn't know the difference between positive and negative. Stick with me on the emotional part, though. I know there's parts of the brain that absolutely do, and there's different endorphins. But when it comes to that numbness and the reaction, if you look at it from the limbic system model, if you look at it from that fight or flight model, especially if somebody's been in trauma, is it's trying to get rid of all the negative things down there, right? Well, so visually in my mind, the brain's kind of shoring up that negative. It doesn't want to deal with all this down here. So it kind of shores that up. Well, the problem is we can't just go to neutral and have nothing but happy stuff, right? There's a reason for the negative sometimes. So what happens is both sides start to come in, right? It just starts to shut down completely. And you can't get the super negative or the super positive. How many people come in and they talk about depression, what they really mean is they're just emotionally numb. They're not sad, they're just numb. Nothing's fun. And Christmas with the kids wasn't good, and so it brings us in. Eventually we get to that numb part in the middle. Again, if you're a neurologist, psychiatrist, I just probably made you roll your eyes, but that's my visual definition of the way the limbic system kind of makes that prefrontal cortex and some of the other parts of the brain shore that up. Please don't write me angry emails that there's good endorphins. So hopefully Maxine, that takes care of some of what you were talking about. Yeah, you bet, Lynn. Let me know if I can help in any way. You can shoot me a YouTube message, or my email's pretty easy. I'll put up here eventually. It's just drtrevor@theangryvikingtherapist.com. I can't do therapy by email, but I can definitely offer some advice and get you in the right direction, find you the right kind of person. So I don't think you were the one that was just down the road from me. Ooh, Lauren, good question. EMDR more efficient than CBT or DBT? And yes, there's some truth to situationally dependent, but if any of you are a therapist and you do CBT or DBT, it's great, but I'm going to frustrate you for a second. So, when I got out of graduate school is kind of like any other schooling, especially for a professional degree. When I got out of graduate school, I did not know to do therapy. I know how not to mess up. I knew what not to say. I had some good ideas. I went to two great schools for graduate school. In fact, I'm a professor at both of those schools now, so I'm very proud of the education I got there. But much like other jobs, you can learn what the motor does, but until you get in there and start fixing it, you don't have any clue how to, the fact that you have to take this part off to get to the alternator, and it's all frustrating, right? So CBT was definitely the big newest trend when I got out of graduate school. So I actually went to the Beck Institute. That's who invented CBT. Got a great education there. I still use some of those skills today. But I walked out of there. CBT is cognitive behavior therapy. So I walked out of there feeling like this stuff makes sense, but I don't feel like this is what's going on with me right now. And remember, I got into this job because I was struggling in the first place. I had a 15-year career in law enforcement I wanted to finish out and couldn't. So I just remember thinking that this wasn't going to solve my problem. It's great. It's good for some things. It definitely has some great science behind it. Aaron Beck is one of the best speakers or one of the best ability to have a therapeutic relationship with a volunteer I've ever seen. But again, it just wasn't for me. And DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, of course, created more for borderline personality disorders, very skills based. There's a lot to it, but they're very heavy on skills. So I would use those things with people that were dealing with trauma, and we would get better. They would get better. I would see improvement. And in fact, I went on to learn rational motive behavior therapy, which is kind of a precursor to CBT. I call it CBT for the angry person because it just fit my style. It's a little more direct. And I still use it today. It's still very good. I use a lot of the skills. I use them in EMDR a lot because that is my primary modality now. But, here's where I'm going to frustrate somebody. I spoke about the good. Now here's where I may anger a counselor. And I actually have intentions to make a video about this soon. But do you find EMDR to be more efficient than CBT? Hands down, without a doubt, both my experience and science will tell you that is so. Because it does a different thing. EMDR is about dealing with maladaptively processed or dysfunctionally processed memories that are causing a problem today, right? It's not about, I don't think the world is a good place or I see it in a negative. Now, I have used EMDR for lots of things, including depression and anxiety, and it's been great because it doesn't have to be PTSD. It doesn't have to be a car wreck. It doesn't have to be a child sexual assault for it to be bringing up problems now. I find it to be much more effective. In fact, as an example, just for myself, when I first heard of EMDR, I looked it up on YouTube and saw some lady waving her hand in front of people asking if they were better, and I thought, heck no. No. In fact, I was kind of antagonistic about it. People would call and ask if I did it. I'd say, absolutely not. Why don't you get in here and do some talk therapy, because that's what works in my office. So, didn't exactly look helpful to me. Thankfully, I went to a critical incident seminar, watched EMDR work on somebody who had been holding on to a very bad trauma for 15 years, and in 20 minutes, it did what was taking me 6 months to do. I was excited and pissed all at the same time. I was also out a lot of money because it's not cheap. But, yes, wholeheartedly, hands down, I'll back it up with any client and in tons of research that it's absolutely more effective. Absolutely. I still use it, and what ends up happening is there's things that we will talk to clients about while they're processing, called cognitive interweaves. A lot of CBT and stuff tends to come from that REBT and CBT world. So, it has its place. It has a lot of good places. It's not a fix-all, CBT and DBT. I'm not certified in them. I'm trained in them. So I'm certified in EMDR. So I'm sure my knowledge base is a little higher for EMDR. Those are my experiences with it. I'm not going to knock them. I still use some of them. But I was banging my head into the wall with clients, I felt like. And then EMDR started doing things that were happening quick. So, yeah, Maxine, that's exactly how I describe that numbness. A lot of people come in and say, I'm afraid I have depression because I'm sad all the time. And they're not even sad. They're just numb, right? So they don't have happy. So, yes, sir, Mr. Million, I do take TRICARE, as a matter of fact. Not a lot of us that do. Not because it's not a good system. It's just really hard to get on. Oh, yeah, Hill's the one not too far from me. That's right. I'll be glad to catch up. You know how to find me. Thank you, Bad Wabbit. Yeah, it was definitely one of the greatest reasons that pushed me through the PhD, is I wanted to be able to teach one day. So, Yeah, I'm sure you have, Casey. That's they treat you guys like they treat it. And I gotta say, once you're in, it's not too bad on our side, but getting in, it's just ridiculous, man. So I wholeheartedly believe, Casey, that things can cause problems 10 to 15 years later. And as a matter of fact, I see that probably 1,000 times more in my office than I do something that happened recently. We have a protocol for EMDR called RTEP, Recent Trauma Event Protocol. I never get to use it because it's always 10 to 15 years later. So, yeah, sleep with the same week trauma. So here's something interesting about that, the limbic system. I've talked a couple of times, if you were here earlier, about what the limbic system does. It's the fight or flight part of the brain. Well, one of the things that the limbic system does is look through those files with the amygdala and the hippocampus, to match things up to know if it would be in trouble. Well, it happens to have a time clock on it too. Nobody has to explain what 9/11 means. Just when 9/11 comes around, those of us that were dealing with that, a part of that, we don't have to. I don't have to sit there and think, man, that was a really terrible thing. It's got a clock on it. And yeah, granted, there's some visual usually and timely reminders of 9/11, but just as an example, my brain just knows when it's 9/11. Especially that early in the morning. I remember what that felt like. It absolutely has a clock. So if you weren't here earlier, remember, it's not the timeliness of the trauma being 10 or 15 years ago that matters. It's what the limbic system thinks about it. And if that trauma is causing us, if something's being going on now that's re-triggering those feelings of helpless and hopeless and not good enough that the trauma caused, you might as well still be there. So, yeah, absolutely. It makes total sense to me, and I see it regularly that, especially around anniversary times, or even to the point of daily general problems that trauma causes. It absolutely does that. Anything that left us feeling helpless, hopeless, or not good enough gets re-triggered today. So, and it doesn't even have to be the same memory or the same trauma that's re-triggered. It's those feelings. So yeah, again, because we're such stubborn people, that's when I tend to see it as 10 or 15 years later when it comes to my office. So you bet, Lauren, I'm always glad to do it. It also has gotten me out of an hour and 16 minutes worth of paperwork I'm supposed to be doing. Ms. Hill, it is Dr. Trevor, just spelled out, DOCTOR, Dr. Trevor at theangryvikingtherapist.com. So I'll sit around for another minute or so. I appreciate everybody's questions. Again, I got on here to waste time. So I did a good job. I was just tired of typing papers. There you go. Yep. Dr. Trevor at theangryvikingtherapist.com. We can't do therapy by email very well, but I can definitely get you headed in the right direction. Find you somebody that can help, even if it's not me. I have no problem with that. Oh, I hate paperwork. Lauren, good question. So we're still kind of getting information about it being a genetic predisposition. Most of us are leaning towards the side of yes, but you said the big word there is predisposition, not necessarily cause. So there's also behavioral factors to it, right? And that are probably even stronger. But let's say you have a family that deals with PTSD. Could you be chemically or biologically predestined for that? Or rather, the predisposition as opposed to the predestination. But yeah, absolutely. But remember, too, that a lot of those things come because of a lack of coping skills or a lack of understanding when you're a kid. I use the example all the time. If you were made to grow up at age 8 because your mom left and your dad was abusive and you had to grow up, you didn't have time to learn coping skills, and you still don't have them. So your brain still doesn't have them. So you can absolutely come back from that. I've seen some great people live some great lives after trauma. But if you're 8 and you had to grow up from 8 to 18 that day, you don't have the skills you need anyway. I get an earful every day, man. This is what I do. But thank you. Oh, and what I was going to say too, Lauren, that I think a lot of the predisposition being behavioral sometimes. If mom and dad turn to drugs or alcohol to deal with any kind of stress, it's pretty easy to want to do it ourselves if that's what you learn. So, yeah, well, good. Well, this is the second live stream I did. It seems to be pretty popular, so I'll keep doing them. To be honest, I like these better than making videos because I just run out of ideas. or just don't feel like they're going to be fun enough for a video to attract attention. So I'll just keep doing these. So you bet, Casey, you know where to find me, sir. Look forward to working with you. Yep, there you go, Bad Way. Like I said, you can be predestined, or there's some some predeterminism there, maybe, whether it's biologically or whatever, but alone, if you look at the behavioral issue, the behavioral side, doesn't that make sense? I mean, doesn't it make sense that what you learned, whether you don't want to do it or not, what you learned is how your brain learns to cope with things, and we kind of stick to it. So how many times do we continue to do the things we know we don't want to do? So, okay, hour and 20 minutes. The last time I did this, it took like 7 hours to upload. So I'll go ahead and start cutting it off. Thank you, everybody, for coming in. There's still 15 of you here. That's pretty cool in my book. And thanks for the thumbs up. Please throw them on there. Share this if you can. I'm assuming everybody that's seeing is probably subscribed. If you're not, please do hit that. That really does... I don't get any money from this. It really does tell me that this needs to keep going on, though. So I'll go ahead and cut it off here momentarily. Thanks, everybody, for your questions and such. I'm much more comfortable doing these than videos any day, which should probably be opposite, and I should see a therapist instead of just going live to the masses. But, all right, now on to paperwork. All right, you're right. You bet, Maxine. I'm glad that you can... you could tune in. A good egg in my world is a compliment, so thank you. I've been called much worse. So, all right, you too, Kirk. We'll see you all, I don't know, the next time I'm avoiding paperwork, I'm assuming. So thanks again, everybody.